This is episode number 154 of the Mixology Talk podcast. And this week, we're going to be talking with the founders of Nickle Dime Syrups. You may know them better from their caged heat syrups and most recently, their fairy dust syrups as well. We're going to be geeking out a little bit. We're going to be talking about flavor extraction without the use of alcohol, and it's a really, really fun podcast, so definitely check it out. Now, one little word of caution, there is a little bit of an audio problem about halfway through the podcast. We tried a new setup using a dial-in and using in-person interview, and there was just a small glitch in the audio, so I apologize about it. But other than that, I hope you enjoy this podcast. Hi everyone, welcome back to the Mixology Talk podcast. Today I have the pleasure of being in an amazing bar, in Jared Hirsch's bar here, and I have two special guests, Jared Hirsch and Absinthia Vermut. Hopefully I said the last name correct.
Pretty close, Vermut.
Vermut, okay, perfect. So they're going to be joining us on a podcast, and we're going to be talking about flavors for syrups and syrup, some other items we can use for syrup production. So thank you guys for joining us. Actually, ladies first, Absinthia, would you mind kind of introducing yourself and kind of talking about your history and all that?
Sure. So I'm Absinthia. I am a longtime absinthe bootlegger. Actually, I first had absinthe back in 96 and started making it for myself, my friends, and my family in 97. And when absinthe became legal in 2007, it took a few years, but I eventually launched an organic brand of absinthe. And while I was doing that, I was studying for my MBA, and Jared and I started talking about his caged tea cocktail syrup. Mm-hmm. I'll let him speak a little bit more about that, but that is the syrup that launched Nickle Dime Cocktail Syrups.
Excellent. And just to be clear, Vermut is your legal last name, right?
Well, actually, Absinthia Vermut is my legal name. I did change it to Absinthia a few years ago, but I've been called Absinthia since I made my very first bootleg bottles of absinthe back in 97. But yes, Vermut is the name on my birth certificate.
That's incredible. That's so appropriate for this industry. It's amazing. Best name I've heard so far, hands down. And Jared has joined us as well, so thank you very much, Jared.
Oh, my pleasure, Chris. Welcome to Foolish Whispers.
Oh, name of the bar.
I built a clown speakeasy in my garage here in the wilds of East Oakland. And so it's an honor and a privilege to be able to share with you and the podcast viewers today.
Yeah, and this is a decked out bar. I'm not going to lie. You have a glass rinser here. You have a full well set up. It really is a thing of beauty. So thank you for hosting us, and looking forward to talking and picking your brain on flavors.
My pleasure. This glass rinser was the very first thing I purchased. It sat in a box for months while the rest of this bar was being constructed around it. But I knew from the beginning I needed one in my bar. And I do mostly bespoke cocktails in here, so I never have menus, I never do anything, and it's just whatever. Everything's within easy reach, and it's just, to me, it's set up the way that I want my bar.
Yeah, for anybody listening on the podcast, this is a ridiculous bar. He's got a copper bar top, he's got the glass rinser built into the bar, wells, he's got a full-on back bar here, and it's beautiful, bright, and colorful, so definitely check out the video if you're just listening on the podcast, for sure. So you guys kind of talked a little bit about your history. You're a bar manager here in Oakland as well?
Yeah, so I manage Sidebar, which is a little mom and pop gastropub that serves the Adams Point neighborhood of Oakland. And we've been around for about 10 years, and we do classic and craft cocktails. And then we also do the best burgers and steaks and mussels and clams. And we're a loyal regulars joint. People come to us on Tuesday is their night, on Wednesday is their night, and it's a very friendly and social bar, and the food menu doesn't change. Barbara, who's the head chef and owner of the restaurant, doesn't want her menu to change. She wants people to know what we do well and to be able to come to us for repeatable, reliable food and service, but she lets me experiment as much as I want to.
Sure.
So I try to keep it. Everything that I try to do at Sidebar is all based on classics. We started off as a classic cocktail bar. And now anytime we sort of do revisions thereafter, it's all based on the foundation of classic cocktails.
Sure. So a lot of old fashions, a lot of riffs on Manhattans, that kind of stuff.
Manhattans, old fashions, martinis, and mostly the sours, which are some of the greatest cocktails on the world. And what's amazing about a sour cocktail is they all follow the same formula. 2 parts spirit, 1 part citrus, and 1 part sugar. and you change those up, and now you can, as long as your proportions are in that classical mode, you can then use that as the platform to be inventive and creative. And that's where the syrup company came out of.
Okay.
Me making a syrup for a sour. And that syrup was a tamarind, cardamom, and chili syrup. And that's where it started.
Okay.
And once I started making that syrup, I took a basic whiskey sour, but now added all these other flavors into it in the syrup component. And suddenly it was an aha moment for a lot of people, myself included.
Right.
And then people started buying bottles and bottles and bottles and bottles. And then we couldn't make enough of it. At Sidebar, a little restaurant.
Sure.
There wasn't enough room for a bottling line
Wow.
in the restaurant, and the owners weren't interested in renting a commercial kitchen to make it happen. It's just
Sure.
a cocktail to them. But I knew that there was something there that needed to keep going because of its response.
Yeah.
Which is when I contacted my friend Abs, and she jumped on board with all of her business experience and her own plans for her own absinthe line.
You're right.
And knowing that would be a really fun marriage to get together and work together on a project like that. And then we launched a Kickstarter, and we raised $10,000 right off the bat. And then we rented a commercial kitchen and got FDA approval and designed labels and went through that whole process of creating a commercial product.
Sure. And we did a whole series on entrepreneurial bartenders and how they kind of go through the process. And there's one thing that I always found with bartenders, and specifically products that they produce, is they're very different from what is available commercially, because their focus is on, I need this to be a good product at the end of the day in a cocktail, not as a standalone product.
That's right.
And to have somebody that has that kind of interest and knowledge and expertise really shines through in the product, and their syrups are absolutely fantastic. I actually came across you guys again. We've been talking for quite a while, but at the Fancy Food Show, I think, about a year ago or 8 months ago or something like that?
Yeah.
And they had a brand new syrup, and it was the best thing I ever had in my mouth.
Wow.
at that Fancy Food Show. I don't say that often, but it was really mind-blowing.
And here it is, ladies and gentlemen. The best thing Chris has ever had in his mouth.
Right, exactly. But it's a great product, and it just kind of like instantly, like, the wheel started turning creatively for me the minute I had this syrup. I was like, this is super interesting. I've never had anything like it before. And the non-alcoholic cocktails you can come up with or non-alcoholic drinks, I should say, just open up the floodgates. So it's basically kind of an absinthe style syrup,
exactly,
without the booze. So
yeah, our first product was Caged Heat, this spicy tamarind syrup,
right?
And then Abs really was pushing for a while for us to expand our line into more products, and I was very nervous about it, and I wasn't sure. I knew that I had this one product that told me it needed to be a product. I wasn't sure that we could then grow a line out of that, and she was insistent. And because she is an award-winning Absinthier, which is the greatest thing to say ever, she said, "What about an absinthe syrup?" And I was like, No, this would never work. And Abs, take it away. Tell us the rest of the story.
Yeah. Well, after that, Jared said it wouldn't work. So what did I do? I showed up at the next meeting with ingredients to see if it would work or not. Because persistency is my middle name.
Sure.
So we created the syrup. We cooked it in Jared's kitchen, and it was amazing. It was so delicious.
Yeah.
And then 3 days later, the herbs had completely turned. And so it was a really interesting process to determine how to make a shelf-stable syrup using these botanicals.
Sure.
And I'll give you a little bit of the origin story as to why I really wanted to make this absinthe-flavored syrup. Over the years, I've had people come up to me and ask, God, I just love the flavor of absinthe, but I don't drink, or I'm taking a month off, or whatever it is. What can I do?
Right.
And I mean, at the time I was like, drink a Diet Coke? Like, absinthe is a distilled spirit. If you're not, you can't have the flavor of absinthe. So as we were talking about expanding the line, I really wanted to see if there was some way to create a non-alcoholic flavor of absinthe containing the wormwood, the anise, and the fennel. And that's how the fairy dust came about. But it was a challenge to get it to be really shelf stable.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the biggest challenges with producing syrups in general, and correct me if I'm wrong, is it's easy to do a one-off of a syrup. But if you're going to production and you're going to be selling this thing, it's got to stay on the shelf for potentially 6 months to a year. And you need that as somebody that owns a business, you need that to shine through no matter what. So I can imagine some of the logistical challenges you guys must have had to face.
Yeah, one of the big learning curves for us has been I create syrups at the bar all the time, but
Right.
half of the time those syrups are not appropriate for shelf-stable products.
Right.
It's one thing when you're making a syrup by yourself, you don't have to pay attention to pH and acidity.
Right.
You don't have to pay attention to, mold growth. You don't have to pay attention to a lot of the same stuff that you do when you're producing a commercial product.
Right.
And that for us was really one of the big learning curves of the business. We lucked out with caged heat because caged heat with tamarind as its major ingredient is already the right acidity for shelf stability.
Yeah.
So we didn't have to do anything to it. But when you're dealing with just herbs, fennel, anise, wormwood, there's no natural acidity to it.
Right.
And so you then have to go back and have to now re-engineer and refigure out how you're going to make something that's shelf stable. Some places use citric acid. You see that a lot in a lot of commercial products. You can use, there's other sort of acidifiers out there. You can use lemon juice concentrate as well, small amounts, but you're ultimately changing the flavor when you do that.
Right.
But the other way to do it is to deal with the sugar concentrations and what's called water activity.
Uh-huh.
And if you have a low enough water activity, it means there's nothing can grow in there, which means that what is left over there is sugar.
Mm-hmm.
So if your sugar content is high enough, then it's a workaround around the acidity issue.
Right.
And all of this is stuff we learned along the way of, bottles spoiling and not understanding why or what. And through consulting with actual food scientists and food technologists, did we finally get to the end result of here's how we deal with this.
Sure.
And that's been the biggest issue. Converting from making it for yourself versus making a product.
Great. So before we go all the way through this process of using some of the ingredients that you were talking about, let's kind of recap a little bit on the basics of syrup production. Like we all know kind of a simple syrup is a 1:1 by weight of water sugar.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people just do it by volume, which is acceptable.
Sure. Hey, listen, at work, I do it by volume.
Right.
A cup of sugar, a cup of water, and I've got my simple syrup.
Yep.
When I'm doing production-wise, though,
you have to weigh everything.
Everything is weighed out.
Right, absolutely.
And mostly because it's also about scale. We're measuring in 50 gallons at a time.
Right.
And so that 1 cup versus it changes as you go.
It amplifies, absolutely.
Yeah, but just 1 cup and 1 cup, that's all there is to it.
Right, exactly.
So anybody who does that, totally fine. Making simple syrup should be simple.
Right, exactly.
And so to do that is basically this. But really, the other really important things is sterilizing what you're working with. Most people don't take the time to actually sterilize their bottles. And that's I think that's the biggest proponent of growth, of mold growth, is not using sterile bottles.
Sure.
You really do have to clean your stuff out, especially if you are a bar.
Right.
And you're serving food to the public. And you really, every time you open it, you do need to take that sniff and see if you smell anything fermenting or if you smell anything growing, and take a look at it and look at the underside of your cork. It does, every time you set up for service, that has to be a key part of your setup.
Right.
Is everything fresh? So many people skip over that step just to get everything set up. But really your job is to check, is this good enough to serve today?
Right. I remember when I started setting up a long time ago, probably about 12, 15 years ago, when I was setting up bars, we would shake the purees and all of a sudden some of them would explode. And we're like, I'll taste it. Oh, it's a little bit fizzy or carbonated. Yeah. And then we would dump it, obviously. But yeah, to your point.
Absolutely. And some of the greatest beverages that tepache.
Oh, tepache, yeah.
It is because your pineapple would ferment.
Yep.
So therefore, why not just we're drinking fermented products all the time.
Right.
So let's figure out a way to control the ferment and just deal with a lightly fermented product. But that's where that stuff comes from. Whoops.
Yeah.
My pineapple fermented. Hey, that actually tastes pretty
good.
Not
too bad, right? Yeah. So that's pretty much the basics of it. And then you can sort of introduce flavors like you were talking about with tamarind and cardamom and some of these other flavors. Now, have you found that there are ingredients, and maybe Absinthia, you could kind of chime in here. Are there certain ingredients that just lend themselves really well to syrups versus maybe an infusion or other form of production? And are there flavors that just don't work in syrups as well, or can be super challenging to incorporate into a syrup? Actually, either of you.
To me, I deal with each ingredient by itself.
Sure.
And there's always a solution to that when it comes to flavors. What's going to work, what isn't. Some things, and usually it depends on the medium that you're using to extract.
Right.
So most things, when I think about making syrups, what I actually think about making is tea. Because I'm making a sweetened tea.
Right.
So if it's herbs or if it's spices or if it's anything like that, I'm making tea, and I take just the volume of water that I have, and then I usually try to figure out concentration levels of whatever the material is that I'm trying to infuse into it.
Right.
And I start by making a tea of that. Usually, once I figure all that out, there's then other techniques that we can go back to sort of speed things up and figure out how to do things better. But with every time, I just start with each individual flavor, and I put it on the stove for 10 minutes on simmer, and that's where I start.
Okay.
And once I have that, I then take the amount of liquid that I have left over, and I then weigh that. And then that's how much sugar I then add based on whatever is evaporated at that point.
Got it.
And then it's note-taking. Then it's like, okay, I want more, I want less. I got a bitter note. Do I need to lower the temperature so that I'm not getting, pulling out some of the more bitter things? Do I want to use dried versus fresh?
Sure.
And it's just about experimenting it with it. And I've yet to come across an ingredient I wanted to use for the bar that I wasn't able to somehow figure out whether it was better as an alcohol extraction, a water extraction, a fat extraction. You can deal with things like with milks and orgeats and nut fats and things like that. All of those things are also really good for extracting things.
Right.
And you sort of, for me, I learn as I go what the best way to extract the flavor is.
Sure.
And it's specific to each ingredient.
Right.
That goes into it. But then once you've figured it out, then it's just a question of, okay, can I repeat what I did?
Yeah.
When I made KHT, it took 6 months for me to figure out what I did. I just threw stuff together, made it, took it to a cocktail competition, won the competition. Everyone's like, oh my God, this is amazing. Okay, great, let's make, this is not what I made at all. What did I do? And so I went back and refigured. It took 6 months, and then I did, and I made sure every time I wrote everything down.
Sure.
And now we go back and we have the ability to now scale it up based on that.
Right.
I learned my lesson, although I don't always learn my lesson. I still sometimes just throw a pot on the stove, throw something in it, throw some sugar into it, go, that's delicious. Oh, crap, what did I do? So, I keep relearning that.
Absolutely.
So I will add to that and just say that, I don't think there's any specific flavors or herbs or whatever that are harder than others. But what we're doing, a lot of people are doing single flavor syrups, right? Which is, a thing in itself. But combining the three flavors as we took the KHT and decided, what do we want to take from our first product and carry through to our whole line? And that really was the the three flavor syrup. And getting those three flavors to really balance and work together, that can be very, very challenging. I don't think any of the ingredients themselves were tricky, other than the smoky. And that crimson smoke, we had a fairly hard time getting that smoke to just that right smoked tea. And it's funny because Jared compared making syrups to making tea, and it was that tea flavor that I think was the hardest part.
Sure.
And hopefully you all try it and think that we nailed it. But it was a little touch and go there for a minute.
Yeah, I think so. There's I'm now reminded of, we did wind up having to make one change because of a health reason.
Right.
Wormwood as an ingredient. The FDA does not approve of a chemical called thujone, which is a convulsant. And so when you make a product with wormwood, they're very sensitive and want to make sure, and there's all kinds of testing, all kinds of stuff to do.
Sure.
So when we went about making our original syrup, we were very conscious to only use tiny amounts of wormwood.
Sure.
We didn't want to poison anybody with it.
Right.
So you do have some ingredients like that where that some plants do have other off chemicals that in higher concentrations, and if you're doing things like making syrups, you don't really know how much is being released. Generally speaking, if it's I always look up if it's like a wild flower or if there's something else that I'm working with. I always do my research first.
Sure. Just
to make sure that it's not going to poison me first and then everybody else after the fact.
Right. Absolutely.
And so you have to have you have to research your ingredients going into it. The other thing that's interesting for us is
I can jump in real quick and just say one note on the wormwood.
Sure.
Which in the syrup, absolutely, that was something that we had to consider. once wormwood is distilled, there's less than 10 parts per million of the thujones, and so it's entirely legal. So when you're distilling wormwood, it's very different than when you're just putting it into or combining it in a simple syrup like we're doing with the fairy dust.
Right. Absolutely. Because I imagine it's probably temperature sensitive with the distillation, and separates out or stays in solution versus kind of going to the final product. But then you don't have that control, to your point, when you're going through the extraction process with water, because it's not going to separate out. It's still going to be left over. So that's a really good point too. And I think this really is something that we've talked a lot about, is being safe with your ingredients, even though it's available like in a herb shop or something like that, doesn't necessarily mean it's safe for human consumption.
Right. It may not be food grade.
Right, exactly. So we really have to do our research before we start to introduce some of these compounds, some of these ingredients, some of these flavors into our syrup production, especially with syrup production, to your point, Absinthia.
We had both the fairy dust and the cherry bomb tested. The cherry bomb for the caffeine level, because it has some coffee in it, and the fairy dust for the thujone level from the wormwood.
Sure, absolutely. Cool, perfect. Now, we started kind of dabbling a little bit about some higher level techniques that you're incorporating into some of your syrups. And I'm hoping you guys can kind of share some of your expertise and knowledge using some cutting edge material or processes or anything like that.
Well, once I figure out what I want to make for the bar specifically, not necessarily for larger scale production, that once we deal with scaling up to a commercial product, then we're in a very different level of production.
Sure.
And different techniques are employed at that point. And commercially licensed kitchens, and we employ people who actually understand that world.
Right.
When you're dealing on a bar level, it's about producing larger amounts than you normally would for personal use, but still not large quantities of things. But what I love to do mostly is I take advantage of my Sous-Vide circulator. I'm sure many people do know, but for those that don't, Sous-Vide means under pressure. But the full system is called the Sous-Vide circulator. And what you're doing is you're vacuum sealing. I put all the ingredients into a vacuum sealed bag. I suck out all of the air, and then you put it into a circulating water bath. And you can dial in the temperature down to 0.5 degree centigrade, on mine at least. And that way you can control exactly what temperature you're setting it at, so that you can experiment and see what temperatures have better extraction. I generally start about 130 degrees Fahrenheit is my normal starting point to do that. And what I love about it is it gives you it just seems it's a lot fresher flavors, greener flavors when dealing with fresh herbs. And I usually dial the temperature up if I'm dealing with stars like star anise or hard spices or peppers or things that are not as porous as a fresh herb is going to be. And usually those like to be at a little higher temperatures, but it varies depending on ingredient. But that to me is the great way to get consistency, which is a big deal. Right. One of the reasons I did these syrups in the first place was consistency. I was making chili. I had worked at a restaurant that had a jalapeno margarita. And as so many of us do now, spicy margaritas are quite the thing because they're amazing. And we would cut these peppers up and put them in the drink, but sometimes a jalapeno tastes like a bell pepper. Right. And sometimes it's a habanero. Right. And how disappointing as a customer to get a bell pepper when you think you're getting a jalapeno. It's so true. Yeah, that's kind of why I was chuckling. I'm like, jalapenos are notorious for such a wide degree of on the same
flavor.
Plant. That's amazing.
Exactly.
And you never know. You can't look at it. You can't tell. You cut it open. You taste it. That's it. And then you can't taste anything else. Right. If it's a really spicy pepper. Right. So one of the reasons I did this spicy syrup to start with was consistency. Was I wanted to be able to batch the syrup over larger batches. Sure. And that way I knew every time I made this drink, it was going to be the same level. It was consistently spicy. Yeah. It does
make a delicious spicy margarita.
I do love me some spicy margaritas. I really do. But I always run into the same problem that Jared just kind of illustrated. Is like, you don't know, you really don't know what you're going to get at the end of the day. depending on the plant and the skill level of the bartender to taste and all that stuff. So I was like, maybe a beer.
Or both. And that's great if you're a home bartender. Like that's part of the fun of it. It's like every drink tastes a little bit different. It's all an experiment all the time. That's why I like having a bar like this where I have that experience where it doesn't matter. I'm not selling drinks to people.
Right.
I don't have that expectation. It's just about experiment and play.
Yeah.
And that's fine. But then once you start selling it to people, now you're getting into issues of reliability and consistency and repeatability.
Sure, absolutely.
And so that's where that was why one of the benefits of batching it.
Okay, so we touched on one of your favorite techniques, Sous-Vide, and I absolutely agree. Like temperature control is just kind of a game changer when it comes to syrups, and being able to dial it in to such precision, I'm sure, has just really opened up the possibilities for you guys.
Yeah, and a lot of fun to play with and to figure it out, and a lot of notes have been taken on a lot of ingredients. Other things I really am interested lately are hydrosols.
Okay.
You can distill. I've been fascinated by seed lip, which is the non-alcoholic distilled spirit.
Keep hearing a lot about that stuff, man.
I mean, there's a whole segment of the market that's growing as a result of their products.
Right.
And I've had a couple of conversations with people in the company, and I get a different answer from different people in the company about how they make it. So I started to go into how I would make it.
Sure. And I'm sure Absinthia probably has some knowledge she can drop on this one too, right?
Yeah.
I started buying some commercial hydrosols. This one is Landscape. This is a hydrosol that's lavender. And so I started looking at them for aromatics for the tops of drinks.
Right.
And what I learned was just exactly how easy it is to make a hydrosol. You're basically starting with tea.
Yep.
Take your organic plant matter. You put it in the bottom of a pot. You put a strainer on top of that. You fill it with water so it just covers. You're making tea. Then you put a bowl in the middle of it on top of it, and then you put the lid on inverted, and what you're doing is you're collecting the steam vapor of the tea.
Sure.
And so that as you do that, it concentrates all of those flavors into the water vapor, and now you have mists, and now you have all these amazing aromatic compounds.
Sure.
I don't use them in drinks by the ounce. They're really expensive, and you don't get very much yield when you do it that way. I've heard of some people using it that way. To me, it's really more for aromatics. But that really can push the flavors. If you have a lavender syrup, and the first clue that there's lavender in that is the smell.
Right.
So if you can hit it with a lavender mist on top, all of a sudden everything else is working to reinforce lavender.
Right.
And really push the flavor forward. Essential oils are very similar, and you can use those in droppers on bitters and also for aromatics. And I've heard of some people using them to almost like a fat washing for martinis and things, to use essential oils. And it's basically the same system, only it's a much more elaborate distill that gets set up, because you're making both hydrosol and essential oils at the same time.
Sure.
And then you're just separating out. So you have just the essential oil left over at the end, and you have like this much hydrosol and like that much essential oil in the end.
Okay.
But those are really great ways of concentrating flavors, and to get more bang for your buck.
Right.
As you do it.
And a little bit, I imagine, for these things, since they are kind of almost technically distilled products,
they are.
A little bit's going to go a long way, right? So a drop here or, in your syrups will probably make a pretty profound effect at the end of the day.
You do get an issue when you're dealing with oil and water in separation. So if you're dealing with essential oils in syrup making, it wants to separate out. It's hydrophobic. So it wants to separate out. So sometimes you need other things, cream of tartar, things like that, to sort of for stabilization in order to get it to actually stay in solution. And that's something that we've gone through as well with our syrups, because a lot of what we wind up using are what's called natural flavors.
Right.
When we first made that absinthe syrup, in 2 days the flavors had degraded when we were using fresh ingredients. Sure. Which is kind of okay if you're at the bar and you can be making your syrups on repeatability, but for shelf stability, we had to go with natural flavors, which are essential oils and extracts of real thing. One of the things that's important about us is that if it says that it uses this ingredient, that it really does have that ingredient.
Sure.
So we're not just using synthesized flavors of things,
right?
But we're really interested in getting down to the concentration of that, and then that staying in solution.
Got it.
And we're finding even still some of our fairy dust, we're getting a little bit of the lushing happening on the tops of the bottles as some of the oils come out of solution.
Right.
And that's something that it's a new product, so it's something we're going to look at over time. We think it's kind of cool that it does that.
It kind of blew me away when you mentioned it. Yeah.
And
the lushing, yeah.
It does, because it has this little cloud. I don't know if it'll show up on here or not, but it has a little cloud film right at the very top of it. Mm-hmm. And that's the oils from the star anise coming out of solution. So it's starting to lush a little bit. We think it's awesome. Does a consumer think that's awesome when they look at that bottle? We don't know yet. So that's still something that we have to figure out as we go forward. But there's nothing wrong with it if you are paying attention to such things. Yeah,
absolutely. Now, as far as the products go, you guys have 4 products, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe Absinthia, you mind kind of telling us the 4 products that you guys have?
Sure. So we started with the Caged Heat, and the Caged Heat is our spicy cocktail syrup. It is tamarind, cardamom, and ghost pepper. And all of the bottles have recipe labels.
Okay.
That one, Jared's holding it there.
Doing a Vanna White modeling for anybody that can't see it.
That one is for the spicy bourbon sour. But as with all of our syrups, you can swap out the booze and the citrus. We were talking earlier about that spicy margarita. So the Caged Heat with, and they're all 2-1-1, very basic cocktail recipes. So 2 tequila, 1 Caged Heat, 1 lime. We'll get you that spicy margarita.
Sure.
What's next, Jared? What do you want to grab? We'll talk about the cherry bomb. So the cherry bomb, we think of that as our crowd pleaser. It's sweet, it's fruity, it's chocolatey, it's cherry, chocolate, and cacao. And the recipe on the label is with rum and lime juice, and it's super yummy.
I'm finding any brown spirit it works really well with whiskey, rye, scotch. Generally less of the peated scotches for that one.
Sure, and I imagine old fashions all day long with that one, right?
And cream drinks. I have a customer right now who will drink 3 to 4 White Russians with
wow.
And that's a lot of White Russians. but she's like she didn't drink that many before. I made her that first cherry bomb, and now you lock into that one thing, and that's it.
That's awesome.
And, non-alcoholic drinks too. So instead of the booze, put a little sparkling water, a little club soda. I happen to have a amazing Valencia orange tree in front of my house, and the oranges, they're not really that sweet. So they don't taste great on their own, but when I slice it up and I put it with a little cherry bomb and a little soda water, oh my God, it's perfect.
Oh, that sounds so good.
So then the last one is Crimson Smoke.
Crimson Smoke is our smoky. It works really well with mezcal, with scotch. When we were first making that one, so that's the smoky tea, the cranberry, and the honey. Mm-hmm. I was like, it's going to only work with vodka, right? Because it's so smoky and it's got so much flavor, and the cranberry with the bitter and the honey with the sweet. But it actually really needs a strong, smoky booze with it. The mezcal, the scotch. Again, great with soda water and citrus.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And then finally, the one we've been talking about almost the entire podcast because I love it so much, is the fairy dust.
Fairy dust. Yeah, the fairy dust is an absinthe flavored syrup. Again, I would never ever call this an absinthe syrup. It's an absinthe flavored syrup. So it's wormwood, anise, and fennel in the simple syrup. And that's great with as a mocktail if you don't want to drink but you love the flavor of absinthe. It's great with gin. It's great with tequila.
It's funny is you mentioned this earlier about people wanting that flavor but can't get it unless it's in alcohol. When we came across, my wife Julia and I came across you guys again at the Fancy Food Show, I think her first response to me was, "Where the hell was this when I was pregnant?"
I remember that from your blog, yes.
Oh, yeah, no, and it's funny because I'll open a bottle of absinthe when she was pregnant, halfway across the house. She's like, "Can I just smell it? Can I just smell it?" So she would have absolutely loved this product, and like I said, the minute I tasted it, I was just like,
well, and the answer to her question, it was in development. It took us, so we had the ideas, we had all the concepts for a good 6 months, launched our Kickstarter, and it took a full year to be able to fulfill that Kickstarter.
Sure.
Making things is really, really hard.
Right. Well, especially when it starts to come to consumer-faced products. I mean, like we were talking about, the logistics behind coming to market with a shelf-stable syrup when you're talking about super fragile ingredients like you guys are incorporating, I can't imagine the complexity of that. And then the testing behind it and all the other things, it's got to be just...
And like you were saying earlier, it's not even about the syrup itself.
Right.
Every tasting of every batch that we were working on, how is it in the cocktail? Right. So that was really the deciding factor. How does it taste? Because a simple syrup, a flavored simple syrup on its own, great. In a cocktail with soda water as a mocktail, that's what was really important.
Sure, absolutely.
We worked with a company down in Irvine who specializes in small batch syrup production.
Mm-hmm.
They do a lot of hot sauces. They do a lot of the stuff. And they hadn't had that much fun that day because I brought all the booze. We were sampling and going through all of our recipes that we had worked with them on. And so we had done all of this stuff. And for them, that's the end of the process.
Right.
And for me, I was like, no.
This is just starting.
Now we have to make cocktails. And so suddenly everybody was coming out of the office. The HR person was coming out. The accounts payable person was coming out. And the whole lineup and everybody. And they were like, we're not going to get any work done today, clearly. Because
that's funny.
And that was our first real serious, outside of my own, for myself and for the few people at Sidebar that I had been serving these cocktails to. That was our first real sort of field test.
Right.
Was the kitchen staff and the rest of the staff.
Yeah, and so while they weren't getting any work done that day, that was us working.
Right.
Yeah, which is how it goes. That's the business right there.
Exactly. It's 10 o'clock. We're making drinks. That's what we do.
And it required us to go back after doing full cocktails with them. Then we had to go back and balance flavors out.
Sure.
And we were trying 3 and 4 different gins with it to make sure that we could have something that was interesting with each different style of gin, whether we had a citrus forward gin or a juniper forward gin or a cask or a not a cask strength, that would be the wrong term, a high proof gin,
right.
Or an Old Tom gin, so we wanted to really have all of that because we're just putting gin on the label. Unless Tanqueray wants to pay to put their name on our label, it's just going to say gin. So we wanted to be able to do that. Yeah, I know you would like that idea. Okay, Tanqueray.
Just saying, Tanqueray, if you're listening.
Well, we'll do that for the right amount of money.
Right, exactly.
And so that's what that was what it was. Does it work with all these various expressions of that ingredient?
Absolutely. Yeah. And like I said, this is kind of where it really separates kind of that bartender experience and knowing that that's going to be your final product, not the syrup.
Right.
That I think somebody that hasn't developed these kind of syrups before kind of misses that. Still good syrups, but they don't have that complexity, the depth, the compatibility that we're seeing with professionally developed syrups and stuff like that. And Absinthia, what's your favorite syrup in your lineup? I mean, I know they're all your kids, but
I'm kind of partial to the fairy dust, of course.
She's right. I mean, my favorite's Cage Tea because it launched the business and because it is just so delicious. But of the new syrups, it's fairy dust. Yeah, it really is. It's
and it's really surprising too. I mean, I really thought an absinthe flavored simple syrup. I was kind of just making it for myself. I didn't think people would love it as much as me. And when we were at the Fancy Food Show, and that was our first time facing the public, we hadn't even bottled it yet. We were watching, it was pre-batched, and we were filling up little cups and giving out samples, and watching it at the end of every day, the fairy dust, we had to make more of it every single day.
Twice. We went through twice as much fairy dust as we did anything else.
Sure.
So fascinating to see.
What I think is most interesting about this is that absinthe is a polarizing flavor. That what people call black licorice. There's no black licorice in absinthe, but that black licorice, people have some sort of reaction to it from childhood when you've had that sort of black, double salted black licorice. What I say iodine like candy. It's different. Abs taught me this. She says, it's different when you're talking about a fennel salad. Yeah. When you talk about the freshness of it. But the other thing that happens sometimes with absinthe, if you're not a normal drinker, it's high proof brandy. It's 120. What's the proof on absinthe? 120?
Well, my absinthe is 55% ABV, so 110.
110. Yeah. So, that's...
They're up at 68% too.
Right, yeah.
Right. Well, crazy. So when you're doing that, great for flavor extraction. But when you're at that concentration, that alcohol, if you're not an experienced drinker, it's an offense
Right.
to a lot of people. So what's amazing was when we took the alcohol out of it and we just dealt with those fresh fennel salad-like flavors. We had people were like, oh, I normally don't like licorice, but I love this.
Yeah.
And so now we're able to start to introduce them to absinthe, and we're able to sort of open up their palates to flavors that they didn't think they liked.
And the fairy dust is in a solution of sugar, right? So it's got that yummy sweetness to it. Most absinthes are incredibly bitter. It's why the tradition of the spoon and the sugar cube came about, to counter that bitter flavor.
Sure.
Now, if I could plug my own absinthe for 1 second.
Do it.
Doesn't need sugar. It's not pre-sweetened, but because I use biodynamic grapes as the base alcohol, and because I use, like Jared was talking about earlier, I use fresh wormwood thrown directly into the booze, the ethanol.
Sure.
So we're not drying the wormwood, and that creates a much easier to drink absinthe. It doesn't need the sugar because it's crafted in such a way with that fresh wormwood.
So this is a perfect segue to kind of talk about some of the products you guys are promoting and making. So obviously, the name of your syrup company is Nickle Dime Syrups. Love how clever that name is, considering the where you guys are based out of. So it's 510 area code, Nickle Dime.
Oakland, California.
Yeah, very, very cool.
Jared and I are both New York transplants, but we absolutely love our adopted home of Oakland. We both lived here for, I'm going on 20 years. I think Jared's about the same.
Yeah. Oh, it's great representing the Bay Area. And then your absinthe, what's the name of the company?
It's called Absinthia. It's an interesting story. It took me 2 years to get my labels approved. I wasn't set out to, put out an absinthe. I've become a trademark brand, which is a little bit weird. But everyone said, this is Absinthia's absinthe. You have to call it Absinthia's absinthe. The TTB disagreed for a while. It took several lawyers and several attempts. We finally got the labels approved. So it's Absinthia's organic absinthe. I have a Blanche, and, making things is hard. I'm on year 2 of developing an absinthe vert. Really committed to making it organic, like the first product.
Sure.
Finding some of those herbs that I need for coloring the absinthe. It's very hard to find them organic. So still working on that.
Sure, absolutely. And so where's the best place for people to find your products, both of them, the 510 or Nickle Dime and the Absinthia?
On our website, nickledimessyrups.com is the best way. We offer free shipping, so you don't have to worry about that. And it comes directly from us.
Perfect. And then Absinthia, where can people find your absinthe?
So there is a where to buy on my website, absinthia.com.
Mm-hmm.
I self-distribute in California. It's one of the things that brings me down to LA, which is where I'm at right now, doing sales calls for both the syrups and the absinthe. And the absinthe just got picked up in Louisiana through Artisan Wine and Spirits, and in New York through LibDib. So libdib.com.
Excellent. Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a huge step.
And I'll be at Tales of the Cocktail. I'm hosting a bunch of events. I'll be doing Meet the Distiller. So if anybody watching wants to come meet me and chat with me and ask me about any of our products, would love to meet you at Tales.
Perfect. Yeah, hopefully quite a few listeners are going to be at Tales this year. We're going to be skipping it, unfortunately, for the first time in probably a decade.
Oh, too bad.
But we'll be right in the middle of our move down in Southern California, but we'll be there in spirit for sure.
It'll be good to give them a year to figure out the new systems as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So anything you guys are working on? Anything? Well, obviously promoting your appearance at Tales of the Cocktail. Are you both going to be there with both products?
I'm not going to be there. She'll be there with her absinthe and the syrups, but basically I'm going to be holding the fort down up here.
Perfect. Anything else?
It's interesting. The absinthe and the syrups, they're two different companies.
Right.
They have different markets, two different type of consumer, and the marketing and the events, they tend to be a little bit different, which I love. I think it's really interesting how different they are in the marketplace.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, because the syrup can be a crowd pleaser. Anybody can drink that. Absinthe should be a crowd pleaser and everybody should drink it, but it takes, like you were saying.
Well, it's going to happen. It's so good.
Yeah.
It's so good.
Perfect. All right. So what's your favorite social media platform that you guys use, or what's the best way for people to kind of contact you if they have questions, comments, concerns, or obviously your website for placing orders.
Yeah, the website is a great place to place orders and to learn about what we're doing, nickeldimesyrups.com. I manage most of our social media. Jared, of course, jumps in when he can. But we're on Instagram, Nickle Dime Syrups. We're on Facebook, Nickle Dime Cocktail Syrups. So find us there.
Perfect. Excellent. Well, thank you both for your time. This is a bit of an experiment for us doing a camera and a dial-in. So hopefully it worked out on the video as well. But honestly, I cannot thank you guys enough for opening up this bar to us and your expertise as well. So definitely appreciate your time. And definitely go check out their website and order some syrups.
Thank you so much, Chris.
Thank you so much, Chris.
So thanks again to Jared and Absinthia for joining us and sharing their expertise on flavor extraction without alcohol. And we'll have their links in the show notes, so definitely check that out over at mixologytalk.com/154. Now, if you found this subject interesting and you just really like learning about bartending and craft cocktails, I highly recommend checking out our Facebook group, the Craft Bartender Facebook group. Definitely check it out over on our website, and we'll have a link there. So have a great day, and we'll talk to you soon. Cheers.